Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hope you're all finding your way to some water. In your heart, at least. And I think many of our comrades must be at Country Fair. I knew maybe 4 or 5 people at least in the song before we were going. Today will be very, very hot in the decibels, so to speak. So I'd like to continue this week, continuing from the teaching last week on the gate of not to. And I had told the story last week, well, not much of a story, just was talking about the place at Shurinji, my teacher's temple, where he would sit, decade after decade. Above his seat was this plaque, which had 3 Chinese characters on it. Not to gate. And that this became really important teaching for me. This is a very old Zen saying. Sometimes it's 4 characters, not to Dharma gate, but in this case the Dharma gate was just collapsed into 1 character gate. A very important teaching for me, and so I was speaking about that last week a bit, and playing with the Chinese, because Chinese is very different than English. There are no articles, there aren't tenses, there aren't all of these things which specify a meaning. There's a wonderful quality that can come out of the teachings from the ambiguity or from the many different possibilities of how you might relate those words. We do that a little bit with poetry in English, and so we're not totally unfamiliar with it, but it's kind of the baseline for how Chinese functions. And so these 3 characters I was playing with a little bit. And in the title for the talks, I put forth what I think would be a more controversial translation. There are not 2 gates. Oftentimes, this one is understood as being the gate of not to. Or sometimes people even go so far, I don't like this translation, but they will translate it as the gate of non-duality. I mean, it's sort of right, but the problem is non-duality becomes one word in English as if it were a thing. Okay, so it's very easy for us to then hold on to the term non-duality as a kind of object. So I much prefer the term not to, even though linguistically non-dual and not to are basically the same thing. And I was making the case that the reason that it's important for us to also read this as there are not 2 gates is first and foremost because we actually have to choose. We have to choose the path. Choose the path, choose a path. Even that's a little funny in English. Which one do you say? So just that we have to choose a path that goes beyond to. Beyond the subject and object addiction that we live in constantly. This is what the Buddha diagnosed. He said that the reason that we're in such dis-ease, such suffering is the way that it's usually translated, but it's not. It's more than just kind of the difficulty of things, the fundamental unsettledness of our cyclical living. Is because we through ignorance, we divide into the subject and the object. And as the subject, we begin to regard things as objects. And the way that we relate with them is karmically driven. It means that we have these patterns in the way that we deal with the objects in our life. And that all the kinds of opposites of a life emerge from this fundamental split that we make between subject and object. So there are not 2 gates means that you have to actually choose to want to go beyond that, to live in a different way, or to live out life in which there are other possibilities than simply living in those cycles. So for me that was very important because I'm sharing my water with someone. I was practicing many different things as a young man, and I was interested. It's fine. Yeah. I was doing many different things, interested in many things, which I'm glad. I think people should do that. But when I met my teacher, I knew that it was time to choose something, to enter into a gate. I had been kind of playing in the gateway. And so that there are not two gates was really important to me. So that I walked through the gate of not two. Oftentimes we live in that place where we always want to have the back door. We always want to have the other choice. I would say particularly in modern North American culture that we're pros at that, right? Yeah. I love you. Let's spend our whole life together. Here's the prenuptial. Which may be a good idea, I don't know. But it's just a little like, wow, what is it? What is it to walk through the gate? What is it to choose something? And regardless of what may happen later, but to really give it our all, or to allow our whole body to go through that gate. I was making the point that takes a great effort. A true effort. And great effort is not the same thing as force. Actually, force is kind of easy. That a great effort is the effort of greatness. An effort in which we're not pushing off of things to try to get somewhere, but we're encountering the gate unencumbered. The effort that it takes to be unencumbered is really immense. So then the question is, how should we live out this not to gate, or this gate of not to? There's a really profound teaching which many of you have studied again and again, because it comes from my favorite part of one of the most important sutras, and really one of my favorite sutras, which is called the Diamond Sutra. The Diamond Sutra is very important within the Zen school in particular. It became the kind of central organizing sutra for a long time. Many of the ancestors were deeply schooled in the Diamond Sutra, and a lot of the way of talking about things or thinking about things, a lot of the teachings are expressed through the Diamond Sutra in a way that began to dominate the language of Mahayana Buddhism after that point. It is one of the Prajnaparamita Sutras. So the Prajnaparamita Sutras, there's many, all the way up to the Prajnaparamita of 100,000 lines, which is very long. When we do the special ceremony where the fanning of the sutras is happening, and everyone here on the sides is fanning of sutras, that's the biggest version of the Prajnaparamita Sutra. We don't have a translation into English of that sutra. But there are many other. The Heart Sutra is almost the shortest. That one we recite every Sunday morning. So the Heart of Great Perfect Wisdom Sutra. That's the Prajnaparamita Sutra, Perfect Wisdom Sutra. There's this great sutra called the Perfection of Wisdom in One Syllable. It's actually about this long, because it tells you it's going to tell you the sutra, and then it tells you the syllable, which is ah, by the way. And then it kind of finishes up a little bit. So that's the very, very shortest one. So the idea of the Prajnaparamita teachings is that from the very just point all the way up to the everything of everythingness is all the perfection of wisdom. And we could just take whatever piece we want, and we'll find the true Dharma right there within that piece. And so the Diamond Sutra is a relatively short one. It's referred to as the Prajnaparamita in 300 lines. And so relatively short. You can read it in about 20 minutes or half an hour or so. If you read Chinese, maybe quicker. The Chinese is usually a little quicker than the English, because we have all those articles and tenses and all these things, which isn't there in the Chinese. Okay, so enough kind of backstory. So in the Diamond Sutra, in the fourth section, the Buddha is explaining to Subhuti how it is that he should practice. And this is what he says. Moreover, Subhuti, in giving a gift, a bodhisattva should not dwell in an object. Giving a gift Bodhisattvas should not dwell in anything at all. Bodhisattvas should not dwell in sight when they give a gift. Nor should bodhisattvas dwell in sound, smell, taste, touch, or thought when giving a gift. Subhuti, bodhisattvas should give a gift without dwelling in any characteristics. And why? Subhuti, the merit of giving a gift without dwelling in characteristics is immeasurable. What do you think, Subhuti? Is the space to the east measurable? Subhuti replied, no, it isn't, Bhagavan. The Buddha said, likewise is the space to the south, to the west, to the north, in between, above, below, or in any of the 10 directions measurable? Subhuti replied, no, it isn't, Bhagavan. The Buddha said, in the same way, Subhuti, the merit of giving a gift without dwelling in any characteristic is immeasurable. Thus, Subhuti, those who set forth on the bodhisattva path should dwell in this teaching. Now, in this teaching, the Buddha is using the practice of generosity or giving a gift, I think for 2 reasons. One is it's a placeholder for the whole path. It's the first of the practices of the bodhisattva, of the 6 perfections. Giving is the first one. So one way, when we hear that word, we can understand that he's saying all of the practices of a bodhisattva when he says to give a gift, because he's using the first one in the list of the practices of the bodhisattva. But I also believe that this practice of generosity, or in this translation, giving a gift, is the gateway. Really, all of the others are not possible without this one. Now, that's true of each one in a certain way, but there's a reason that this one comes right at the front of the list. So I think it's a good one to use as the model to try to understand what the teaching is about. So he says when giving a gift, we should not dwell in. Sometimes people translate this as be attached to. So they will say, don't be attached to a sight, a sound, a smell, a taste, a touch, or a thought. Right? I prefer dwell in. The Chinese character means something like to dwell in. So when you're giving a gift, think about that. When you make an offering, you give a gift to someone, where is your heart? Where are you dwelling? Are you dwelling in the characteristic of the gift itself? Like, oh, it's so cool. I got my little brother this drone. He's been wanting this drone for a long time. This is all the things the drone can do, and and all this great. Is that where your mind is? Or is it in the fact that you're giving the gift? Is it that you want them to be happy? Is it you want them to be thankful? There's all kind of places where you could let your mind rest. And the Buddha is saying something very strict here. He's saying that don't let your mind dwell in any of those things. Now, may those thoughts come through? Of course. We're ignorant beings. So we have all of those kind of thoughts, but he says, don't stay there. Don't make your home there. Give the gift and practice the relinquishment of all of those ways that you might try to measure what this gift is, that you might try to define what it is, and then look for the feedback, right, that tells you that you have accomplished the giving of the gift. And that's why he says that the merit is immeasurable. He says when we're giving a gift, if we're not attached to any of those things, or we don't dwell in any of those provisional ways of understanding what it is, actually there is this merit that comes forth that is completely beyond measure. There's one translator, his name is Red Pine, who he uses the Chinese and both the Sanskrit. And he's very fond of not just saying merit, but saying the body of merit, which goes back to an older Sanskrit version of the sutra. So he would say the body of merit is difficult to measure, is what he says, immeasurable. This immeasurable is also the word boundless. In Dharma gates are boundless. which normally we think of as just is. There's tons and tons and tons of Dharma gates. But this is pointing at something different. The Dharma gate itself is boundless. It's a gateway of immeasurable merit. Now, that can all sound a little bit theoretical or maybe abstract, but we actually, if you pay attention, we actually don't really want the measurable merit. It's not really satisfying to us. If you think about back to that situation where you give a gift to someone you care about, you give them a gift, you hope they'll be happy with it. All of the things that might come from that you might dwell in, are not really what's going to satisfy you. Let's say the person's really, really happy about the gift and they thank you so much, right? So that's great. I love that when that happens. I'm not saying that's bad, but I say that's what I'm most concerned about. What happens when a person doesn't say thank you? What happens when you give the gift that kind of is a dud? What happens in all of these situations in which you have identified gift giving as being about people being pleased with the gift that you give them? That's not actually what the gift is about. The gift is about non-separation. The gift is about your intention for other people to share in the bounty of a life. And anything that you define that as will in some way limit it. So the measurable merit, although it can be satisfying for a short time, even in the moment, it's not exactly what we want. It's unstable. I remember this many, many years ago, the first time I gave a Dharma talk at a retreat in North America. It was at a retreat that Dharma Rain Zen Center was holding long, long time ago. This is when we first met, Shanae and I first met. And the teacher, Kyogen Carlson Roshi, I showed up without any intent. I was just there to practice. And he said, "Oh, okay, you should do this, you should do that, you should do zazen." And I gave a talk. Maybe it was a different retreat. I can't remember. All I remember was that after the talk I gave, he said, "Oh, Ejo, that was a great talk." And I thought, I'm screwed. Why? Why? Well, that's a good thing, right? An eminent teacher who you really admire and is taking care of you praises the talk that you gave. It wasn't that he praised me that was the problem. It's just that was the measurable merit. That I was dwelling in that. And as soon as he said it, I knew that was exactly where I was dwelling. I could have told earlier if I had paid attention, Where was my nervousness coming from? Was it coming from would the Dharma actually penetrate the hearts of the people listening? Or would I look good or sound good? Our hearts are like this, right? Now, I'm not saying that you should have some kind of negative sense of yourself if you have those kinds of thoughts or feelings. But that's not what the teaching says. The teaching says, don't dwell there. It doesn't say if you have those kinds of thoughts or feelings, you're not a bodhisattva. It says, no, the practice of the bodhisattva is to not dwell there. Right? And so that for me, that was an instance of where the giving of a gift, the gift of the Dharma, I could see where I was dwelling somewhere. And immediately I could feel the unsatisfactory quality of that, even though, in a sense, I had received exactly the thing that I would want to receive, which would be praise from this teacher that I admired so much and was an important teacher to me. Okay? I say if we pay attention to this is happening all over the place in our life. That it's actually this immeasurable body of merit, or this immeasurability, which is what's satisfying, not the thing that we can grasp. So if we come back to this gates issue, not two gates, the gate of not two. Another way we could read those three characters is gates are not two. If we have, there are not two gates, the gate of not two, Or you could also read, gates are not two. Now, just by definition, this is true, right? If you come out here to our humble mountain gate, and you stand on one side, and you look through the gate, and there's the other side of the gate, there's this side and that side, but they're not separate. They're not two. There's no independently existing other side of the gate and this side of the gate. Although our language and our patterns of thinking affix to that very quickly. We say, oh, this is the outside of the gate, this is the inside of the gate. But actually, the whole thing about a gate is they're not separate. That's why it's called a gate. Now, if it was a wall, we could call it something else. Walls can also be gates, but just for the sake of what I'm saying now, okay? That the gate is the expression of the indivisibility of this side and that side. They appear together, they appear interdependently, this side and that side. And so, that's why I say the great effort is not a force. We don't force ourselves, we don't break down the wall to move from the dwelling in to the immeasurable. That actually, the limited, the part of us that's like, oh great, I got the praise, me and the relinquishment in immeasurable body are inseparable. That's why it's a Dharma gate. So we can't force our way through that. In fact, as I said earlier, force is really, when you use force, it's when you're the weakest. I wish someone had taught me that earlier. When you're using force, if you notice yourself forcing something, that's when you're the weakest. So we don't want to use that. We actually want to use our deeper strength. And shift from just trying to claim the object of how it is that we want to see, what we want to see, to get the feedback, whatever it is, whether it's some seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, or some feeling or thought that we have. We want to move from that to the way it is that we are seeing. Not just what we see, those are the characteristics that the Buddha is talking about in the Diamond Sutra. Don't affix yourself to the characteristics. Those are all measurable. But we want to shift from that process of identifying through characteristics to seeing, which is unencumbered, which does not affix itself in the way that we are dwelling in those characteristics. The characteristics simply become the information about the causes and conditions of the situation. So that's what the Buddha Dharma is trying to teach us to do. And in that, there is this glorious golden body of a Buddha which appears. Not as an object of characteristics, but as the truth of living. So, back at the gate, the not to gate. I would like to encourage you in this way. The immeasurable body, your whole body, the body that's beyond your narrow way of thinking what you are or who you are. That small you that gets perpetually dissatisfied with whatever is happening. Does that happen pretty quick? It is kind of amazing, you know. Something can be, like I read one Buddhist teaching where they said, you know, here's the most comfortable chair in the world. And you sit in the most comfortable chair in the world, and then you sit in that chair, and it would be the most comfortable chair in the world. For how long? You know, that becomes the question. How long could it be the perfectly comfortable chair? A minute? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? An hour? No. But that's what happens. So this whole body, which is not dwelling in those characteristics. It can't go through separate gates. That's the way you can think about it. It doesn't have the capacity to go through separate gates. I'm going to put a little bit in here, I'm going to put a little bit in here. Okay. I'm going to hedge my bets and maybe go to communion every once in a while. Come from Catholic background. But you see that hedging our bets, that's the whole problem. Or that's one facet of the problem. That to face a gate squarely and to make the effort, again, not the force, but the effort, which sometimes we could also call discipline. Not the discipline of forcing ourselves to do something, but the discipline of receptivity and uprightness. That's what meditation is calling us to. That can't be a split activity. And the reason is because the purpose of the gate is not just to give us a certain experience. The purpose of the gate is to align us in a different way. Again, not in this way in which we're looking for the object of fulfillment. My precious, whatever it is. That object of fulfillment will always be unstable. So this gateway is trying to reorient us from grasping an object of fulfillment and to see that fulfillment is not about grasping or getting this thing that it is that we think we need. It is about a whole way of being. And that gate's aligning us. So this is why hard choices need to appear in a life. This is why difficulty is so important. It presses us into a place where we have to align. Sometimes we feel like that alignment is we're having to cleave something off. We still have a very two way of thinking about it. Right? But ultimately, in many situations, we do have to choose one thing over another. How do you choose this thing without cutting this thing off? This is one of the reasons that our school is so ecumenical. Right? But it's kind of like very ecumenical and not at all ecumenical at the same time. Right? It's kind of like, yeah, everyone is welcome and everyone should practice. But there is this gate, which is not defined by the denomination or a dogma. Right? It's something more intimate than that. And is encouraging us to take that gateway 100% seriously so that we can be aligned by it. And in that way, this limited, measurable, ignorant body of my being, which is oftentimes anxious and unsatisfied, and also joyous and other things, but oftentimes anxious and unsatisfied, it finds itself at this gateway in which the immeasurable body is not separate from it. Now, notice I didn't say that it simply walks through the gate and then this body is gone. The gateway is the expression that those two sides are immeasurable. So to whatever extent we're able to go through the gate from the side of ignorance to wisdom, there has to be the exact opposite and commensurate movement from wisdom to ignorance. That's what that gate is like. Sometimes I feel like this. If you go to the other side of the gate and you're like, I'm on the side of wisdom now. Guess which side you're on? Not the wisdom side. Right? So the going through that gate is always flipping. You go to the side of, you're practicing diligently. Oh, wow. Yes. And then as soon as you grab onto the merit of that, then you're already on the side of ignorance. But that's fine, because that's the only way wisdom makes it to the side of ignorance, is for ignorance to be there. That's the only way for the Dharma to come into the lives of our community, is for us to be willing to be the ignorant, unskillful people that we are. That's not all we are, but we also are that. And to the extent we're able to be those things, then the Dharma can come through that gate. But when we're unwilling to be them, we cut them off, we only want the wisdom side, then there's no way for the teaching to come in. So that's why I'm so often emphasizing, like, you know, people will say, oh, I have this, you know, this deep sorrow or problem or whatever, and almost only answer I can give is, yeah, be with it, you know. It's kind of not very satisfying, but it really is the place where the ignorance and the wisdom are not two. And that gate of not two is exactly about that. It is the way that the Dharma flows into the world. We have a few minutes if there are any questions. Mm-hmm.
So, just one gate.
Not two gates.
Not two gates.
Yeah.
Okay, not two gates,
Yeah.
just one gate. So,
Not two gates. Not just one gate.
Not two gates.
Not two
Not two gates.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so there's this gate, but there's no that gate.
Right.
Okay, so is that not, how does that differ from most other spiritual practices who say it's my way or the highway?
Yeah. So in some way I would say it doesn't. In some ways. That I think there is a wisdom inside of many traditions that say, you know, I am the light, only through me shall you come to know the Father. That there is a way of reading that, or a truth to that, which I think is very important. The place where I see the difference is how is it held. So within this tradition, we don't say, this is the gateway, this is what it looks like for everyone, this is what it smells like, these are the things you have to believe to go through the gate, this is exactly how you'll behave if you go through the gate, etc., etc. And so there's the gate, go through it, we're all watching, go through it. In this tradition, the emphasis is that there is this gate of not two, and it is inevitable that every being will encounter this gate. How will we regard it? It is not a gate that could be defined by characteristics. So we can't define that gate, we can't nail it down in a dogma or a prescription of some kind. We value the gate itself, rather than trying to nail down what the gate is. Maybe that would be a way of saying it. But part of the reason I'm giving this series of talks now is that I think it is an advancement for us to say, wait a minute. It doesn't mean, you know, if we say, I am the light, the one and only through me shall you know the Father, that doesn't have to mean that you have to be a Christian or you're going to hell. I think that's something that a lot of people are waking up to. Right? And they're saying, but the way they wake up to it is oftentimes to relativize all of it. Right? So that's a gate, there's this other gate over here, there's this other gate over here. And then when we come across this gate, which we inevitably come across many times in our life actually, we have this tendency to relativize. And in that movement to relativizing, how are we going to actually go through the gate? That's the kind of question that I'm bringing up. So we say, oh, there's this way, this way, this way. They all have their own value. They're all, blah, 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 and we're kind of back here. It's like, great. So what are you going to do? And so that's why I think in some of the traditions where they really say, this is it, the important part of that teaching is it's asking people to move or to make an effort to go through that gate. We get a little bit like a overly fuzzy relaxed when we relativize everything. So in this way, I think actually Buddhism really has already impacted the landscape, the spiritual landscape of North America at least, in some pretty wonderful ways. And one of those is that there is to be a Buddhist. There's lots of ways to be a Buddhist, but it's kind of high bar. And it's not saying people who don't buy into that high bar are less than, or whatever we might fill in. And I think that kind of approach is quite important. Mm-hmm.
When can you say you're a Buddhist then?
Yeah. So there are different Buddhist cultures, but I would say in the Buddhist culture that I grew up in the Dharma people don't say they're Buddhist. Yeah. And they don't say they're not Buddhist. I had this very interesting conversation with a friend after I was ordained, and we were talking about something, and I was like, well, I don't know why anyone would say they were anything. I'm Buddhist, but I don't feel like I had to cut off being a Christian, and I was going on and on about this kind of thing, and finally my friend Hugh, he looked at me and he said, Ejo, you're a Buddhist. Shut up. And it was really helpful to me, actually, because I was very into this kind of like not making it into a thing. And he was also saying to me, it can just be a thing. But, so this is the deal. To be a Buddhist, what I don't then get to say is Buddha's on my side. Buddha's not on anyone's side. So oftentimes we want to say I am something because we want whatever X, Y, or Z to be on our side. And in the case of Buddhism, there's no such thing. Buddha's on everyone's side. Yeah. And so that kind of quality informs it. Many people will think that receiving precepts through Jukai is the time that you become a Buddhist. I don't subscribe to that. I would say that anytime we take refuge, we're a Buddhist. And that can be formal. That means it can have like a ritual that's accompanied it, etc. Or it can be simply we recite the vows, or simply we come to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha for refuge. And at any time that we stop, we're not Buddhist. But there's no characteristic of a Buddhist that is a Buddhist or not a Buddhist. So we're not stuck. Actually, sometimes I don't take refuge. In that moment, I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not acting as a Buddhist. But my life is centered around refuge. So in that sense, I can say I'm a Buddhist. And oftentimes I am trying to practice taking refuge. So that's Buddhist. My daughters started to call themselves Buddhist when their Christian classmates were trying to get them to go to church. Suddenly they're referring to themselves as Buddhist.
Christian friends say, well, what do you practice?
Yeah. So one of the things, this is maybe a little bit kind of detailed, but I think it's important for us to understand the structure of the conventional way of thinking of religion in different time periods and different places changes a lot. So the particular time period and place that we're in, religion has become defined almost exclusively by certain sets of dogmas. So the way you know that you're anything is whether you subscribe to a particular set of doctrines. That's become the dominant way, and you have to say that you believe them. So faith now is defined as belief in a certain doctrines, and that's become largely the way that we consider it. There's some exceptions to that, but so like if your Christian friends ask you like, well, what do you do or what do you believe? Then they're asking it from that perspective. What are those things? So if people ask me that, if they say like, well, what do you believe? I probably would say generosity, maybe kindness. That's our practice. And if you want to know more about generosity, there's a lot to know. It's like that's a tip of an iceberg, but I would say that's the leading side. And then another way to think about that is the difference between orthodoxy and orthopraxy. So those are technical terms. Orthodoxy means to have the correct teaching. Ortho means correct. Doxy is like dogma, the correct dogma. And orthopraxy is to have the correct practice. So in those should be in balance with each other, is kind of the traditional way of thinking about it. but almost completely North American religious landscape has become about the correct teaching, and the correct practice is not as emphasized. In the Soto Zen school, orthopraxy is really emphasized, and orthodoxy is really kind of down here. So anyway, those are just some ways to think about it.
Well, just,
Mm-hmm.
could you talk a bit about gaining that insight into circumstance where you're getting the larger picture, the deep insight, versus seeing the sight, smell, sight, touch. In terms of taking the backward step, because the circumstances I'm in, I found that there's a lot of patterns developed, and because of illness right now, we're on this roller coaster.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's really hard, you know, when you're used to empathy and, you know, oh, what's a loving response here? It's almost like it just requires this step backwards.
Yeah.
And so that I can really be present and not be push-pulled. And could you speak to that a little bit in terms of?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like mostly you've answered your question. I mean, that's a good thing. But
What did you say? I'm sorry.
that you've answered your question,
yeah.
which is a good thing. I guess the only thing I might add to that is that's what it means to be at the gate, is that this, of course, the characteristics, for example, facing an illness, there's going to be all of the characteristics of illness. But the Buddha's teaching us here, don't dwell in those. Don't try to respond to the illness through affixing to the characteristics. It doesn't mean there are no characteristics. It means that that's not where you're looking. That's the backward step. Okay? It doesn't mean ignoring the characteristics. It means not dwelling in them, not making them the assessment criteria or the pivot point for the whole situation. Because there is a boundless body which can be attentive to the illness, which is not about any particular thing that happens in the illness. It can respond to and be 100% present with whatever is happening in the illness, but it doesn't pivot based on the recognition of that particular thing. And that's where real healing is possible. And oftentimes the real healing doesn't heal our body.
The real healing doesn't what? I'm sorry.
Doesn't necessarily heal our body. So that would be another place where oftentimes we're looking for the characteristics of healing being reflected in the body. And that's, there may be body healing, but it's not defined by that characteristic. And so the backward step is one way that we talk about not dwelling in, not moving forward and taking my place inside of whatever that characteristic is, whether it's something I see, smell, taste, touch, or think or feel.
And sometimes the backward step feels like tough love in a way, when they're, I mean, it seems like the dance back and forth, you know, between setting some boundaries and stepping in, stepping out. Does that make sense? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things when it comes to boundaries is when we talk about this gate of not to, no one's there but you. So all of these things we're trying to make in our mind, well, they did this or they're doing that, and so I need to do this and I need to do that, and da, 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 da. That's all dwelling in the characteristics. That's all. That's not the gate of not to. The total responsibility that comes from you're the only person at the gate is not just the responsibility to try to take care of the other person's problems. That's not responsibility. The responsibility is totally about yourself. And then in that place, then how will you be? But we oftentimes affix, again, to those characteristics of objects, whether they're, in this case, a person. I'm not saying you're making the person into an object, but you're reading them like an object by assessing everything that's going on with them, including their own, how they're handling it or not handling it or whatever. And then you enter into that kind of push and pull. So I would say I wouldn't intentionally do tough love. I would look for the place where the great effort or the effort of great just brings you to a place where you're not trying to fiddle with someone else's karma.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the ultimately tough love. Yeah.
That's what it feels.
Yeah. Okay, maybe we have time for one more. Uh-huh.
No, go ahead.
I had a question, thinking about what you were saying earlier about gifts and just the nature of gifts. Something for me that's always been a little bit difficult since I've reached adulthood and left home is just culturally how differently folks can view gifts. For instance, growing up, if it was rude to open a gift someone gave you in front of them because the gift was the point. You're supposed to say thank you and then you open it later. I find so few things now seem like actual gifts. It seems like an object with expectations attached to it. Like, oh, I gave you this item and now I want to see you use it in the way that I envisioned you using it. And if you don't do that, then it feels like there's like an ungratefulness kind of. And I just think about like how can that be reflected in just like in the spiritual sense, where it feels like there's, at least for me sometimes, like there's like, oh, there's a teaching or there's a lesson or there's something, and I feel like I'm supposed to do something with it. Otherwise, I'm not engaging with it in the way that I'm supposed to. Like I'm given the gift of insight into something, but I'm not seeing it the way I'm supposed to see it. Yeah, I don't, it's not a question so much as say something.
Well, I would say that's right where your practice is. I mean, your karma is affixing to this for some reason, and you don't need to know why it's affixing to it. But it's good to realize that it is. That when receiving a gift, your sense that there's this expectation placed upon you. Now, I'm not going to make any comment about whether there is an expectation or not expectation placed on you. You don't even need to know that, actually. All you need to know is that you're having that experience that an expectation is being placed upon you. And that is dwelling in a certain characteristic. And so the practice of relinquishing that, if someone does give you a gift, gratitude is very natural, regardless of what the gift is, just like you say. That's why you don't open the gift, because if it's a real clunker, then you have to feign something, right? It doesn't, so it's hard. So that particular etiquette had some wisdom inside of it. But I would say, in this case, don't focus so much on what their expectation may or may not be. Focus on your idea that there is an expectation and study what that is about. And as you become more aware of it, you get more opportunity to not dwell in that and to just say, oh, if there is an expectation, that's not fair. I don't have to receive that expectation. And if there isn't an expectation, why am I making up this expectation when there isn't one? You can study study both of those. And then I think there's a kind of could be a kind of grace in the difficulty of the interaction around gifts when it comes to that. I think the really difficult one is when we find closer relationships of kindness and mutual support, when we find that a person is actually really wants something from us, and that's why they were acting in that way, which is just inevitably going to happen because we're not all that pure. And so in that place, to be able to really express our appreciation for the kindness and support that people have shown us, but we really, if we're going to be kind, we can't buy into that expectation. As soon as we mold ourselves to it, we're really doing them a disservice, and we're doing ourselves a disservice at the same time. So I think that's another thing we can, the more wise you become about that arena, the more you have those options of how to work with it.
Is that still considered a gift?
Hmm?
Is it still a gift when it's given in that way?
Well, I mean, what's a gift? It's hard to say, but I think that's a good thing for us to study ourselves. If I'm giving something because I have an expectation to getting something back, that doesn't exactly qualify as generosity. Probably, it's probably not so helpful to then. I mean, sometimes it is if you feel like you're being manipulated, to be like, whoa, feels like manipulation. Maybe you should have this back. I think there's time for that, definitely, or a clarifying conversation. But another thing I would say is there's these interpersonal things which are all very tricky and difficult, but they're all connected to this very, very, very deep wounds and desires. And so we should be, the more aware of those we can become, the more that we can work skillfully in that realm. And that sometimes a person may be putting a trip on us, and it isn't really a gift in the purest sense of but it then becomes an opportunity to say, hey, what's going on here? And that can be a gift to everyone.